Now you will see the most emotional historical photos. Write in the comments which photo you liked the most. In 1980, Sister Margaret Ann Paul was found in a locked chapel in Toledo, Ohio, placed near the altar in a scene that looked carefully arranged. For 24 years, the case stayed cold until modern DNA testing helped link it to the priest who had led her funeral service. In 1994, a passenger bus on Dizengoff Street in Tel Aviv was hit during the morning rush, turning one of the city's busiest roads into a major emergency scene. 22 civilians died and 50 were injured, and the attack became one of the most remembered events of that period in Israel. At the funeral of Marilyn Monroe in 1962, her former husband stood apart and covered his face beside the flowers. He arranged the small private service and sent roses to her resting place for years, a quiet detail that made this photo even more haunting. On June 8, 1940, Japanese soldiers from the 2nd Battalion of the 23rd Infantry Regiment watched smoke rise over Shashi in Hubei, China. The city is now part of Jingzhou, and this photo captures the rooftop view of a street battle during Japan's push along the Yangtze River. On May 2, 1968, Master Sergeant Roy Benavides ran into heavy fire in Vietnam to pull a trapped American recon team toward rescue. Medics thought he was gone until he suddenly spit in a doctor's face, proving he was still alive after one of the most extreme rescue missions of the war. On June 6, 1956, the Seminole atomic test sent a massive water and sand column above Eniwetok Atoll in the Pacific. The device was placed inside a water tank to study underground test effects, creating one of the strangest test images of the 1950s. During the Normandy airborne landings in June 1944, the transport plane carrying Easy Company Commander Thomas Meehan and his headquarters group went down before they could reach the fight. 17 paratroopers and the crew were lost in this wreck, leaving the unit leaderless just as the invasion began. John Battersby became known in 19th century sideshows for his unusually thin body. But after performing, he worked as a blacksmith and wagon builder in Pennsylvania. He and his wife Hannah Perkins traveled together for years, turning a stage pairing into a real family life with 4 children. On April 15, 1974, a security camera captured Patricia Hearst inside Hibernia Bank in San Francisco, only 2 months after the Symbionese Liberation Army had taken her from her home. The image shocked America because the missing heiress was now seen taking part in the same group's bank raid. During the Golden Gate Bridge construction between 1933 and 1937, Chief Engineer Joseph Strauss pushed for a safety net under the workers, even though it cost $130,000. The net saved 19 men, and those survivors became known as the Halfway to Hell Club. On June 17, 1953, East Berlin workers and citizens challenged Soviet tanks during the East German uprising. The protest began over harsh work rules, but within hours it became a direct public stand against the communist government. In December 1922, archaeologists photographed Tutankhamun's tomb with royal chariots taken apart and packed into a small chamber. These pieces had waited sealed for over 3,000 years, turning a dusty storage room into one of Egypt's most valuable discoveries. In February 1967, soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division led captured Viet Cong fighters through rice fields during Operation Thayer II in South Vietnam. The quiet village setting makes the image striking because it shows how close the war came to farms, homes, and ordinary rural paths. Near Utah Beach in June 1944, Captain Edward Gatto briefed L Company inside a barn without wearing a helmet. The former Louisiana State University football star died in combat less than 2 days later at age 27. In 1982, Soviet Army officers rode through Checkpoint Charlie in a black GAZ-24 Volga after an official visit to West Berlin. The scene looks ordinary, but this crossing was one of the most watched points of the Cold War, where every car carried political meaning. In 1896, Amelia Dyer was photographed after investigators linked her baby farming business to a long pattern of missing children in Victorian England. The jury reached its verdict in under 5 minutes, and her case exposed one of the darkest hidden scandals of the era. Pushball was invented in 1894 by Moses Crane, using a huge leather ball that weighed about 70 pounds. The sport spread through American colleges and even had horse and car versions, but almost disappeared within one generation. On January 30, 1966, medic Thomas Cole treated Staff Sergeant Harrison Pell at Anthe while one of his own eyes was still covered by a bandage. Henry Hewitt's photo reached the cover of Life magazine and won the Robert Capa Gold Medal for its powerful view of battlefield medicine. In 1863, American Civil War soldier Jacob Miller was hit in the forehead by a musket ball and somehow survived the injury. Fragments stayed in his head for decades, with pieces reportedly coming out years later, and he lived until 1917 at age 76. Argentina's Orion 2 rocket crossed the edge of space, becoming the first South American object launched beyond 100 kilometers. Its nose cone was caught in midair by helicopter, making the recovery almost as remarkable as the launch itself. From April to August 1972, Burundi, under Michel Micombero, carried out a state campaign against Hutu civilians and Tutsi Banyaruguru rivals. Estimates range from 100,000 to 300,000 people dead, and former King Ntare V also died before Micombero was later overthrown. In Los Angeles in 1951, Officer F.G. Plamondon inspected a cannabis plant kept at Van Nuys Jail for a police lecture. The plant had been sent to the Valley Division as a teaching example, making this one of the stranger law enforcement photos of the era. Around 1953, a United States soldier posed with his Korean girlfriend on a hillside during the Korean War. Their calm portrait is striking because it preserves a private relationship inside a conflict that divided the peninsula for generations. Captain Lyle Wolfe flew the Marauder bomber Mr. Fala with the 455th Bomb Squadron and completed his combat tour. At his end of tour party, a junior officer showing off a quick draw trick accidentally wounded him in the shoulder. But Wolfe survived. On July 25, 1956, the Swedish liner Stockholm reached New York with its bow crushed after colliding with the Italian liner Andrea Doria near Nantucket. The damage looked impossible to survive, yet Stockholm stayed afloat while Andrea Doria sank in one of the Atlantic's most famous passenger ship disasters. On August 9, 1945, an aircraft camera captured the atomic cloud rising over Nagasaki after the second nuclear bomb used in war. The calm sky around it makes the photo deeply unsettling because it shows a world-changing moment from far above. In 1898, this staged tableau showed Union and Confederate veterans shaking hands to support the Spanish-American War. A young girl labeled Cuba stood between them, turning a political message into one of the strangest patriotic images of the era. In North Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh publicly apologized for serious abuses during the land reform campaign from 1953 to 1956. This rare photo shows a leader forced to admit that a policy meant to reshape society had gone deeply wrong. In 1958, torpedo man Greenhill worked inside the torpedo room of United States ship Nautilus during its secret voyage under the North Pole. Nautilus was the world's first nuclear-powered submarine, and it became the first vessel to cross the pole fully underwater. In 1953, a famous Hollywood actress and a baseball legend posed together beside a Canadian lake during their short, closely watched romance. 1 year later, they married, making this quiet mountain photo feel like a rare, calm moment before a very public split. In the 1940s, United Airlines promoted stewardesses with strict standards for age, weight, and height. The image shows how early air travel openly sold youth and appearance, long before cabin crew were mainly presented as safety professionals. In June 1943, Higgins Industries workers in New Orleans built patrol torpedo boats for fast missions in the Pacific and other war zones. The same company also produced landing craft, making this shipyard one of the busiest small boat factories of World War II. In 1892, Robert Henry Clarence marked his 20th birthday as hereditary chief of the Mosquito Coast. The armed lines and flags show how local authority, British influence, and ceremony still mixed on Central America's Caribbean coast. In December 1950, protesters in Niterói marched against the idea of sending Brazilian soldiers to the Korean War. Their banners show how the conflict reached far beyond Asia, turning a distant battlefield into a street-level political fight in Brazil. In April 1975, a United States helicopter evacuated people from Phnom Penh as Khmer Rouge forces closed in on Cambodia's capital. Crowds watched from below, not knowing the city would soon be emptied under a radical new regime. In 1984, American defector Charles Robert Jenkins sat with Hitomi Soga, their daughter Brenda, and Anocha Panjoy on a beach in Wonsan, North Korea. The calm family photo hides a chilling story because Soga and Panjoy had both been taken to North Korea in the 1970s. In 1903, Korea, children studied with writing boards outside a small local school while their teacher watched from the doorway. Their straw shoes, plain robes, and open-air lesson capture Korean education just before Japan tightened control over the peninsula. In 1957, Las Vegas, dancer Lee Merlin became known as Miss Atomic Bomb after a photographer dressed her in a cotton mushroom cloud costume. There was no real beauty contest with that title, but the photo turned nuclear fear into one of the strangest publicity images of the atomic age. In July 1944, during the Battle of Saipan, an American soldier sheltered an injured Japanese boy from the rain inside an aircraft cockpit. The child was waiting for transport to a field hospital, making this one of the rare quiet moments captured in a brutal island campaign. In 1979, the Italian cruise ship Angelina Loro caught fire while docked at St. Thomas, then settled in the harbor after firefighting water filled the hull. She was later refloated and sent for scrap, but sank in the Pacific before reaching Taiwan. In 1926, this beach watchman in Mar del Plata checked whether swimmers covered up properly after leaving the water. The photo shows how even a day at the beach could be controlled by strict public dress rules. On February 24, 1949, a captured V-2 rocket with a small second stage lifted off from White Sands in New Mexico. It became the first United States rocket to reach outer space, turning a desert test range into a doorway above Earth. On February 23, 1945, a nearly deflated Japanese Fu-Go balloon was found grounded near Tremonton, Utah. It had crossed the Pacific by wind current, carrying a ballast system meant to keep it floating all the way to the United States. In June 1945, Australian soldiers inspected an abandoned Japanese Kai-45 heavy fighter on Labuan Island. One soldier carried an Owen submachine gun, a compact Australian weapon built for close jungle fighting. On March 22, 1944, an American bomber crewman from the 91st Bomb Group posed with a German shell fragment caught in his M2 flak jacket. The white circle marks the impact point, showing how one piece of protective gear may have saved him during the mission. On March 5, 1956, a Hollywood actress sat in the dining car of the New York-bound 20th Century Limited train as film executives turned toward her. The scene captures old studio power in one frame, with publicity, travel, and business happening at the same dinner table. In 1967, a United States door gunner flew above the Mekong Delta, watching the river bend through farmland below. The photo captures how the Vietnam War was often seen from helicopters, with quiet landscapes below and danger just out of frame. In 1934, the ocean liner Morro Castle caught fire off New Jersey after returning from Cuba, shortly after its captain had died on board. The ruined ship washed ashore near Asbury Park, and the disaster later pushed designers towards safer, less flammable liners. In 1943, an American soldier wrote notes inside a captured Japanese headquarters on Kiska Island in Alaska. On the wall beside him were rough cartoons of Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill, left behind in one of the strangest rooms of the Aleutian Campaign. This before and after view shows Hiroshima in 1945, with the same church standing as a landmark in both frames. The comparison makes the scale clear in seconds, because an entire city layout nearly disappears around one surviving structure. On February 18, 1926, M. Sylvia Donaldson became the first woman to preside over the Massachusetts House as acting Speaker. Women packed the galleries to witness it, while newspapers presented her and Susan W. Fitzgerald as signs of a new political era in Massachusetts. On November 5, 1943, United States pilot Richard Stearns captured this German Messerschmitt 410 falling away after a successful air combat pass. The canopy had been released so the crew could escape, while Stearns himself was later captured in April 1944. In the winter of 1947, men cut a narrow passage through deep snow on the Pickering to Whitby Road in northern England. They were paid by the day to clear sections by hand, leaving walls of snow taller than a person on both sides. In 1970, an aerial fire truck overturned on Broadway in Los Angeles, drawing a huge crowd outside the Lancashire Hotel. Crews had to hose down the street and work for 3 hours before the heavy vehicle could be lifted and towed away. In 1929, the Golden Arrow record car appeared on London streets with a sharp, streamlined body built for Henry Seagrave. That same year, it reached over 231 miles per hour, making this quiet city photo a glimpse of one of the fastest machines on Earth. In 1945, Marine Charles Lindbergh from Minnesota stood on Mount Suribachi during the battle for Iwo Jima. He helped raise the first American flag there, but a later second flag photo became the image the world remembered. On February 25, 1939, Britain installed its first Anderson shelter in a garden in Islington, London. Millions of these small backyard shelters were later built, giving families a hidden place to wait during air raids. In February 1945, United States Army engineers built an M2 treadway bridge over the Rower River near Linnich and Jülich, Germany. Its steel tracks sat on inflatable floats, letting troops rebuild a crossing where the original bridge was already gone. In London, 2 women sunbathed above Piccadilly while the street moved far below, and a cinema advertised "The Thing from Another World." The photo turns an ordinary rooftop into a sharp slice of 1950s city life, with fashion, film, and traffic in one frame. In the 1960s, a martial arts icon practiced simple moves at home while his young son watched and copied him. The child later became an actor himself, making this family lesson feel like the beginning of a second legend. On March 2, 1945, crewmen tried to save parts from landing craft LCT-61029 after it was forced onto wreckage at Iwo Jima. The damaged craft had a hole in its engine room, showing how dangerous the beach itself remained even after reaching shore. On December 13, 1972, Harrison Schmitt and Eugene Cernan walked beside a large boulder at the Torres Littrow landing site during Apollo 17. This grainy television frame shows the final Apollo moon mission, with one astronaut still in orbit while the last 2 moonwalkers explored the surface below. In 1947, Ukrainian prisoner of war Vasily Rambovsky was found in Norway after hiding in forests and barns since his 1944 escape. He was still wearing rags and did not know World War II had ended, making this photo feel almost impossible. On March 7, 1947, a camera on a modified V-2 rocket took the first photo of Earth from more than 100 miles high. For the first time, scientists saw the planet's curved edge from space, decades before human spaceflight became real. On February 19, 1945, landing ship Medium 206 beached at Iwo Jima while bringing the 4th Marine Division ashore. The Marines lay low on the volcanic sand as the landing unfolded, showing how dangerous the first minutes on the island were. On February 24, 1968, Nature announced the first known pulsar, first spotted by graduate student Jocelyn Bell Burnell at Cambridge. She found the strange repeating signal with a huge field of radio antennas. But the later Nobel Prize went to her supervisor and another radio astronomer instead. On Monte Piano, Austro-Hungarian troops released a paper balloon carrying printed messages across the mountain front. Before radio could reach every trench, even wind and weather were turned into tools for psychological warfare. In 1989, British soldiers trained for fighting in built-up areas with a Carl Gustaf recoilless rifle during a mock tank action drill. The fake street sign and phone box show how realistic training sites were built to prepare troops for close urban combat. In 1942, Jewish women in occupied Szydłowice, Poland, were photographed carrying bundles during a forced deportation. The packed bedding and calm street make the image chilling because it shows a family crisis captured in an ordinary town moment. In 1912, Frederick Fleet was the Titanic lookout who first saw the iceberg and warned the bridge. He survived the sinking and both world wars, but his later life ended tragically, far from the fame of that night. The RMS Queen Elizabeth cuts through the Atlantic, with waves breaking over the bow of one of the largest ocean liners ever built. During World War II, this same luxury ship was turned into a troop carrier and moved thousands of soldiers across the ocean. In 1986, Soviet oil workers raised a red socialist banner high above an industrial plant in the USSR. The staged scene shows late Soviet propaganda inside heavy industry, where labor, politics, and production were presented as one message. In February 1958, Pennsylvania Railroad diesel locomotives pushed through deep snow near Winterset in Cambria County, Pennsylvania. The drifts covered the tracks so heavily that crews had to carve a trench around the train to keep the mountain route open. On August 5, 1929, the German airship Graf Zeppelin passed over Cresson, Pennsylvania, on its way to Lakehurst, New Jersey. People stopped in the street to watch the giant craft overhead just weeks before it completed its famous flight around the world. This is the only known photo of Pacific, the small boat Bernard Gilboy sailed from San Francisco in 1882 to cross the Pacific alone. A huge wave broke his main mast and left him without food supplies, yet he survived 164 days before rescue near Australia. In 1919, workers painted the roof girders at Hammersmith Station while hanging high above the District Line platforms. The photo shows the hidden labor behind London's underground, where even routine maintenance demanded balance, nerve, and trust. On February 23, 1917, by the old Russian calendar, protests over bread shortages and the war began spreading through Petrograd. Within days, strikes, soldiers joining crowds, and political pressure forced Nicholas II to give up the throne. In 1962, a car carrying 3 young people went down a 25-foot embankment into the Los Angeles River. The current carried it 2 miles, but all 3 escaped through the windows and swam to safety. On February 18, 1986, floodwater covered Guerneville in Northern California after the Russian River rose over the town. From above, roads, homes, and trees nearly vanish into one wide sheet of water. In 1916, circus elephants walked through Greensburg, Pennsylvania, when the traveling show arrived in town. For local crowds, the animals turned an ordinary street into a one-day parade before the main performance. In October 1942, United States ship Hornet burned during the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands after repeated air attacks left the carrier unable to operate. Crews tried to save her for hours, but she was later abandoned and sank as one of the most dramatic carrier losses of the Pacific War. In 1945, American soldiers carried Okinawan women and children in a marine amphibious vehicle toward a refugee camp. The photo shows civilians being moved away from the fighting, packed into the same craft used for the island landing. In the 1950s, two men in Sicily lit a towering firework wheel during a village festa. The sparks fell like a bright curtain over the square, turning a local celebration into a dangerous-looking night spectacle. In 1985, Colombian soldiers moved into the Palace of Justice in Bogotá after the building was seized during a national crisis. The two-day operation ended with more than 100 deaths, including judges from Colombia's highest court. In 1927, A. Frankel photographed this massive ancient ruin, often linked in old captions to the biblical Tower of Babel. The tiny figure at the base makes the structure look almost unreal, turning a religious legend into a stark archaeological image. In 1933, the old Grimsel Pass Hotel in Switzerland stood beside the rising water during construction of the dam that would create Lake Grimsel. The building was later flooded and rebuilt higher on the slope, making this photo a last look at the hotel in its original place. In 1954, this test house at a United States nuclear site used mannequins to study how ordinary rooms reacted to a blast. The staged bedroom looks calm, but every lamp, wall, and window was placed there for one controlled experiment. Before becoming known for television comedy, B. Arthur served in the United States Marine Corps Women's Reserve during World War II. She worked as a truck driver and typist, a sharp contrast to the screen career that later made her famous. United States Marine Lance Corporal Robert A. Bishop crawled into a Viet Cong tunnel complex found by the 2nd Battalion, 26th Marines. These narrow underground passages hid supplies, routes, and living spaces, making tunnel searches some of the most tense work in Vietnam. In the 1880s, 3 girls posed beside a Viking-age runestone in Strobo Meadow, Sweden. Its inscription says Vibern raised the stone for his brother Solva, preserving a family memory for nearly 1,000 years. On February 13, 1960, France carried out its first nuclear test, Gerboise Bleu, in the Algerian desert. The blast rose from a tower 105 meters high and made France the 4th country to test a nuclear weapon. The Bolton-Paul Overstrand was one of the Royal Air Force's last biplane bombers, but it carried a feature far ahead of its time. Its nose turret was powered and enclosed, making this awkward-looking bomber an early step toward modern aircraft gun positions. In 1952, oil floating on Cleveland's Cuyahoga River caught fire and sent thick smoke over the industrial waterfront. The river burned several times in the 20th century, later becoming a powerful symbol for environmental reform in the United States. Between 1943 and 1945, a German Focke-Wulf 190 closed in on an American B-17 bomber over Bremen. The thin trails across the sky show how crowded and chaotic the air war over Germany could become in seconds. While Al Capone became infamous in Chicago, his older brother James Vincenzo Capone reinvented himself as Richard Two Gun Hart, a prohibition agent in the Midwest. He posed with seized bottles and law enforcement gear, hiding the same family name that made his brother famous. Charles Black Bart Bowles was a Civil War veteran who became one of the most unusual stagecoach bandits of the American West. He was known for calm holdups, polite manners, and poems left behind, while this reward poster offered $1,000 in gold coin. On May 25, 1971, United States Army Major William Adams flew a lightly armed helicopter into a surrounded firebase in Kontum Province to evacuate 3 badly wounded soldiers. His aircraft went down during the rescue attempt, and he was later awarded the Medal of Honor for choosing the mission when he knew the risk. This photo appears to be a 1930 mugshot, not an image from the 1982 Duk Koo Kim and Ray Mancini boxing story. The boxing case itself changed the sport after Kim died 4 days later, leading to shorter title fights and new safety rules. In the 1970s, Central African ruler Jean Bedel Bokassa crowned himself emperor and filled his uniform with medals to project absolute power. He was later surrounded by disturbing accusations linked to his rule and coronation, but the most shocking claims were never proven in court. In 1946, Marilyn Monroe earned $10 an hour posing as a reference model for commercial artists before her film career took off. This studio photo shows how early glamour art was built from live poses, then turned into polished magazine and poster images. In 1961, Joan Risch vanished from her Massachusetts home, leaving her infant son inside and her young daughter saying, "Mommy is gone." The strange clues in the house turned her disappearance into one of the most unsettling unsolved cases of the era. From 1924 to 1946, Paris's 122 became famous for theatrical-themed rooms, including an Orient Express room with train sounds and a rocking floor. At its peak, it reportedly received more than 1,500 visitors a day, turning fantasy staging into a full business before it closed after the war. In 1930, Baby Ruth posed in stage costume under the name that made her a curiosity attraction of the era. Her cheerful studio portrait shows how performers were marketed through bold nicknames and memorable images long before television fame. A Japanese Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber released its load over Port Moresby during the Pacific War. The long-range aircraft was feared for its reach, but its light protection made it one of the most vulnerable bombers in the sky. In 1957, Greek students filled Athens streets to support Cypriot independence and demand talks with Archbishop Makarios. The signs show how Cyprus became a major political issue in Greece, while Makarios returned from British exile as the movement's central figure. In 1994, a Russian volunteer fighter posed with a Zastava M76 rifle in Sarajevo's Grbavica district during the Bosnian War. The city skyline behind him makes the photo tense because the front line ran through ordinary neighborhoods. In 1945, rows of German Me-262 jet fighters sat near a hidden forest assembly plant east of Obertraubling Airfield. The photo shows how late war aircraft production was pushed into wooded sites to hide Germany's first operational jet fighters.
In 1964, Randy Gardner stayed awake for 11 days during a school science experiment that became famous worldwide. By the final days, his speech, memory, mood, and focus were badly affected, making the case one of the most studied sleep experiments in history.
The Apollo 13 Command Module Odyssey was lifted from the Pacific on April 17, 1970, after a serious oxygen tank failure ended the moon landing mission. Its stained hull became a symbol of survival, bringing James Lovell, Jack Swigert, and Fred Hayes safely back to Earth. Muhammad Ali once tried to lift retired boxer Johnny Coulon, who weighed about 50 kilograms, but was famous as the unliftable man. Coulon used balance, posture, and timing to make stronger men fail, turning a simple trick into a legendary photo. On July 29, 1871, the small canvas boat Annie made the first documented sail on Yellowstone Lake toward Stevenson Island. Only 12 feet long, it carried James Stevenson and Henry Elliott across the park's largest body of water decades before modern tourism filled the lake. On March 18, 1936, floodwater from the Kiski River covered streets, bridges, and homes in Leechburg, Pennsylvania. From above, the town looks almost swallowed, with rooftops and rail lines becoming the only clear map of where the streets used to be. In October 1940, the fuselage of a German Heinkel He-111 was hauled by road to a scrapyard after the Battle of Britain. Its aluminum frame was valuable, but for local boys, the fallen bomber was also a forbidden souvenir hunt on wheels. After the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, men stood among broken stone at LaSalle Street and Washington Street in Chicago. The ruins show how the city's business center was stripped down to walls and dust before its rapid rebuild began. In March 1945, the damaged German light cruiser Leipzig fired its 15-centimeter guns from Gdynia Harbor as Soviet forces advanced on the city. Still crippled after a collision with Prince Eugen, She later limped to Denmark with refugees at only 6 knots. This frozen wreck is SMS Magdeburg, the German cruiser lost near Odensholm in 1914 and later locked in Baltic ice. From the wreck, Russian forces recovered German naval codebooks, giving the Allies a major intelligence advantage at sea. In 1945, surrendered German soldiers walked through ruined Berlin near the Brandenburg Gate. The broken streets around them show the final collapse of the Third Reich in the very city it had turned into its power center. In 1954, Japanese work crews cut apart a naval wreck half buried in the black sand of Iwo Jima. Nearly 9 years after the battle, the island still held broken ships along the beach, like unfinished evidence of the war. In 1911, Scotland, 2 children stood before a policeman after being caught taking vegetables from a garden. The covered face and small pile at their feet turn a tiny local offense into a strangely memorable street scene. A Royal Navy Grumman Avenger ditched beside escort carrier HMS Smiter after its engine failed during takeoff. The aircraft stayed afloat long enough for the crew to escape, turning a failed launch into a tense rescue scene. During the Guadalcanal campaign, Marine parachutist Kenneth Parker cleaned his M1941 Johnson rifle inside a simple field shelter. He later landed with the 5th Marine Division on Iwo Jima and died on the first day of fighting in 1945. In 1944 or 1945, Italian partisans were led through a town by soldiers of the Italian Social Republic. The tense walk captured one of the final and darkest stages of Italy's civil conflict near the end of World War II. On February 21, 1916, German troops began the Battle of Verdun, one of the longest and most intense battles of World War I. This photo shows the attack near Le Mort-Homme, where constant artillery turned hills, forests, and trenches into a cratered landscape. In 1935, Italian forces built a giant sculpture of Benito Mussolini at Adwa, Ethiopia, during Italy's colonial campaign. The soldier standing against the stone head shows how propaganda tried to turn occupation into a monument of power. On November 7, 1941, Red Army soldiers marched through Moscow while German forces were already pressing toward the city. Many went straight from the parade to defensive positions, turning the ceremony into a public signal that Moscow would not surrender. In July 1906, a horse and buggy crossed a shallow river where there was no bridge in sight. The quiet scene shows how everyday travel could still depend on animals, water depth, and a driver's judgment. In the early 1970s, Terry Cooper of Leeds United and John Hurst of Everton met in mid-air during a fierce English football match. The frozen moment looks almost impossible, with both players fighting for the ball while the crowd watches from inches behind the pitch. In the 1930s, a factory worker carefully painted doll faces while shelves of unfinished heads surrounded him. The photo feels eerie, but it shows the skilled handwork behind mass-produced toys before plastic automation took over. Around 1950, bodybuilder Steve Reeves performed a pinch deadlift, gripping the weight plates by hand instead of using the bar. The lift showed rare finger strength long before Reeves became famous worldwide as a classic physique icon and film star. In 1903, 2 Delhi Durbar guards stood beside an American travel photographer who documented India's landmarks and imperial ceremonies. Their height difference turns the portrait into a striking record of colonial pageantry, staged power, and early travel photography. In 1940, Portuguese consul Aristides de Sousa Mendes issued thousands of visas in Bordeaux, helping Jewish refugees and others escape Nazi-occupied Europe. He defied orders from Lisbon, lost his diplomatic career, and turned one stamped paper into a lifeline for entire families. During the Great Winter of 1947, a London double-decker bus was nearly buried after heavy snow-trapped roads across Britain. Passengers and crews faced weeks of frozen streets, blocked routes, and snowdrifts tall enough to swallow vehicles. At the 1900 Olympic Games in Paris, some events were held inside public park spaces rather than modern stadiums. This early horse jumping scene shows how informal the Olympics still looked before the Games became a tightly organized global spectacle. During World War I, armies tested large manned kites that could lift an observer above the battlefield. Before aircraft became fully reliable, these strange kite systems gave commanders a risky way to watch enemy lines from the sky. Write in the comments, which photo did you like the most and for what reason?